I just may ask a question. In terms of the speaker's time, he has 15 minutes. Does this go into his time period?
The desk will take care of his time, so he will not be unduly denied.
Okay, thank you.
And start with Mr. Gant.
Speaker, yield.
Sir, will you yield?
Respectfully, no.
Will not yield. Ms. Mayor.
Respectfully, no.
Mr. Blake.
Will the Speaker yield?
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Harris.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Seawright.
Yield.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Jaffe.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Seawright. Oh, you went home. Well, I can't see everybody. If you guys, once you've done your business, please sit down. Ms. Rosenthal.
Speaker, yield.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Arroyo.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Arroyo. Ms. Arroyo. Thank you. Ms. Arroyo. Thank you. Miss Arroyo. Thank you. Ms. Russell.
Will the Speaker yield?
Respectfully, no.
Mr. Rivera. Yes.
Will the Speaker yield? If he doesn't, can I get you a glass of water?
Senor.
Respectfully, no, and thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Titus.
Respectfully, no.
Mr. Ortiz.
Respectfully, no.
Standing up. Ms. Bishat.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Gunter.
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Cook.
Respectfully, no.
Are you at your desk? You at your desk. Can you?
Respectfully, no. Respectfully, no. Respectfully, no.
Mr. Titone.
The Speaker from Staten Island yield.
Respectfully, no. My brother from Staten Island.
Ms. Warner.
Will the Speaker yield?
Respectfully, no.
Ms. Davila.
Will the Speaker yield?
Respectfully, no.
Mr. Linares.
Respectfully, no. Respectfully, no.
Ms. Richardson.
Speaker, yield.
Respectfully, no.
Sir. Somebody's. No. Mr. Hevesy is only stretching his legs. Please, sir.
I know this is an emotional issue, and I know that it affects all of you very deeply, as it does me. But I'm not looking at this through a political lens. And I'm not looking at it through the prism of race or gender or anything else, other than one particular thing. And that happens to be the prism of life and humanity and the value of human life. And so when you consider the value of human life, when you consider the fact that 15 billion babies have been aborted since 1973 in the African American community, I think that that's something that you should all take into consideration before you vote on this bill. I'll wait until everybody, clears out. If you want to leave, you can leave. It's fine. Because the left is very, very much willing to walk away from a debate when they disagree, but yet they will sling arrows at the
Morelli,
right.
why do you rise, Mr. Morelli?
I'd like to remind the member that while this is emotional and he can be passionate about it, I think casting aspersions or suggesting how other people feel and how they're acting is not in accordance with our keeping decorum. The gentleman is free to express his opinions. He's free to express how he feels about the bill in front of the House. I think that members are right in their concern that he's expressing how he thinks that they feel about the bill before the House. I would ask him to restrict it to how he feels about the bill without casting aspersions on others.
Let me clarify. I didn't mean. I didn't.
Point of personal privilege, Ms. Glick.
The member has suggested that people are leaving because they don't want to debate when the member refused to yield to a series of members. I believe that that is out of order and should be reflected in the...
And Mr. Morelli did admonish us to be careful how we conduct ourselves. Mr. McLaughlin, why do you
Personal
rise?
privilege, the member did not say that they were leaving because they did not want to debate. He didn't say that at all. So that's not exactly true. He said they're leaving because they didn't want to listen to what he was saying, not because they didn't want to debate.
No.
I think Mr. Morelli has clarified the position of the House relative to how we conduct ourselves and how we refer to each other in any debate, heated or not. All issues are of great concern to the members here. All issues are of great concern. The strength of this body is that we learn to respect each other's differences and not to castigate individuals for being different. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I would just indicate that by walking out during my time, certainly there's an aspersion that's being
Sir,
cast.
we're on the bill. So
Yes.
your concern about their activities is maybe for another time, but not now.
Perhaps, but I'm just making that note to you, Mr. Speaker. I'll go back to being on the bill.
Why don't you do that,
Thanks.
sir?
So I knew that this would be a very sensitive issue, and I knew that there would be a lot of folks that didn't like what I had to say. The problem is that the truth hurts, and sometimes you need to hear it so that you can grow and that so you can move on and do better things for your community. And one of the things that we need to do better in our community is make sure that we have the resources to be sure that the children that are being brought up are going to have the services are going to be necessary for them to survive, to make it in education, to make it in life. And that's something that maybe we're not doing good enough. Because if the option is the only option for that single woman who decides to have an abortion, if that only option is the abortion, then we're doing something terribly, terribly wrong. And we need to do better. But I will just very briefly go back to the point that I was making, which is that the minority communities in this state and in this country are affected 3-to-1 worse off in terms of the number of abortions that are had each and every day. And that's something that we should all be very critical of, because every life is valued. Every life is equal in every community. And we need to keep track of that. And we need to sometimes be reminded of those figures. And so I'm not coming at anybody and attacking anyone. I'm just reminding folks about statistics, about the truth. And so I'm going to vote against this bill, and I'm certainly urging you all to do the same. But it's not because of politics. It's not because of a particular ideology. It's because I value human life. And I don't think you need to be a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal or a conservative to value life. It's important. So I'll be voting in the negative, and I'm sure I'll be attacked, whether personally or indirectly, in this chamber. and that's your prerogative, and I can take it. But I'm not speaking because I want to promote a particular ideology. I just want to promote the concept that life is valuable and that we really need to identify the fact that many, many, many lives are being lost. They're being taken from us. And that's very sad. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Walter for his second.
Boy, that's going to be tough to follow, Mr. Speaker. Would Ms. Glick yield for a few more questions where we can put everybody back to sleep about the penal law and Supreme Court cases?
I refuse to yield.
Fair enough.
Ms. Glick will.
Fair enough. That's fine. I mean, I thought we were having a respectable debate, her and I, but that's we can generalize the feelings and thoughts of others onto everyone in the room. And if that's the point we're going to make, then let's make that point. I mean, that's ridiculous. Really? This is how this House is going to operate, Mr. Speaker? You know, there's no
One
innocent,
is given
there's
the
no
right,
innocent people here. You know, there is just as
Walter,
many people on
Mr.
the other
Walter.
side making noise.
Mr. Walter, one is given the right to yield or not to yield, as you will when you have a bill up. So once again, allow the rights that are established to be exercised without comment.
Well, on the bill then.
On the bill, sir.
This bill is not about health care choices. It's not about a women's rights. There's no legitimate threat in this state to a woman's right to an abortion. There are no access issues. There's no restrictions, either de jure or de facto. This is purely a political bill. That's all it is. It's a statement, a symbolic vote that can be trotted out at election year after year to divide and categorize the people of the state of New York. If we were truly concerned about this issue, we would be voting on a bill today that establishes a true regulatory framework within the health law. There would be clarity on who could and could not perform an abortion, clarity on where and when the procedures could take place. There would be reasonable regulations that the vast majority of the people of New York State agree with. Informed consent, counseling, parental notification, a limit on when we can perform abortions, not all the way up until the day of birth. These regulations and enforcement laws, those are the type of laws. There would be reasonable regulations and enforcement of clinics and make sure it's safety and clean and that their standards of practice are being followed. Unfortunately, this bill does absolutely none of this. But what it will do is it'll make for some great campaign mailers, so congratulations on that.
Mr. DiPietro on a second.
Sure, Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to answer a couple questions. A reference was made about Abraham in the Old Testament where God was testing him to sacrifice his child. That was a test by God. Let's clarify that. And to test Abraham, and Abraham took him and put his child on the altar that he had made, and his son had helped make for him. And at the last moment, God gave him the reprieve and said, I tested you, and you have passed, and all my blessings on you. And he blessed Abraham. He never sacrificed his child. So I want to make that clear. It's in Scripture. Okay? Secondly, I think I've described my sentiments. Because I'm religious, I bring that up, and I made it very clear in my statements that I know there are other faiths. That's great. Everybody, but again, we're up here speaking our minds, so I'm telling on this bill what I think. I am anti-abortion from the very beginning. I disagree with a lot of the efforts, and my facts are based in the Bible, so I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Speaker. But again, I know some people stood up. If they would like to ask me some questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions, or if anyone has any questions about my stance, I'd be glad to, I know a bunch of people stood up for my colleague, but if they haven't for me, I'll be glad to discuss it. If not, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Glick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to know where to begin. First of all, the notion that I believe a member made reference to convenience or whim, economics, convenience, or whim. Women make decisions about whether or not they are going to carry a pregnancy to term rather seriously. It's so insulting to hear this treated as if women, oops, I'm pregnant, oh boy. Should I get a haircut? Should I get an abortion? I'll get a haircut today, tomorrow I'll get the abortion. That's just not, it's so incredibly insulting and demeaning of women. No woman should carry a child that she does not wish to raise. Many women face the tragic decision of having to have an abortion when they would rather carry the pregnancy to term because of some dreadful anomaly or a serious health threat to her. Pregnancy is not risk-free. Many women develop gestational diabetes. Many women are required to take bed rest. There are serious complications. 14 and 15-year-old girls probably shouldn't have to have a child, not only because they're not capable of raising them, but there are serious bodily changes that take place that put their health at risk. That's why we believe that New York State law should include a health exception. Now, we've heard a lot about the lives that are lost through abortion. Let's talk about the lives that were lost before abortion was legal. The women who were found in crappy motels, bleeding out, dying from sepsis. The women who were found to be, who were taken to a hospital and subsequently dying because of a botched abortion. The women that some of us have met who were unable to have children they desperately wanted to have because they lost the ability to have children because of a botched abortion before abortion was legal. We are talking about women's lives. They matter. They are important. The fact that there are a number, somebody made reference to the number of abortion services in poor communities. That's because Planned Parenthood is sometimes the only primary care available in certain communities because it's not really very lucrative for doctors to open up their private practices in poor communities. So you have Community Health Network or Planned Parenthood. They provide reproductive health services, but the majority of the services that they provide are actually primary care services. We are not suggesting that anybody has to have an abortion who doesn't believe in abortion, who doesn't want an abortion. We are saying that the life and health of the mother needs to be protected. The choices that women make are based on many factors. If you have 8 children and you've talked to your doctor, you've talked perhaps to your religious advisor, and they will say to you, can you bear another child? You know, after a number of pregnancies, it's sometimes a woman's health is diminished. So they may make a decision that they'll have an abortion because they don't want to risk the fact that their 6, 7, or 8 children may not have a mother. These are hard decisions, and it just is appalling to me that people think that they can impose their own personal beliefs on anyone else when it comes to the most basic decision. There have been women in the state of New York, and these services are not widely available. There are at least 20 or 30 counties in the state of New York where there is no abortion provider. So there are women in the state of New York who have to travel. This is a medical procedure that is eminently safe. It is important for women to have the access to controlling their own reproductive destiny. They may have had birth control that failed. They made a choice to avoid pregnancy, but unfortunately, that didn't work out. They tried to prevent a pregnancy because they didn't want to raise a child. They may not, for any number of reasons, and it's not your place to put your judgment in place of theirs. There is some suggestion that somehow a woman's body is simply a vessel, and once there is a fertilized egg, all bets are off. She has no choices to be made after that. New York stepped out before Roe v. Wade. This bill is needed to align New York state law with federal statutes. And it is only because New York was a leader in determining that women had the right to control their own reproductive futures. And individuals, legislators, who've never clapped an eye on an individual woman should not be replacing their decisions for hers. We had a blow-up here because many members were deeply offended at certain phraseology. And I leave it to members who felt that a line was crossed to take their own actions. Some of them asking the member to yield so they could ask perhaps a specific question about why certain statements were made, but they weren't given that opportunity. We've always had this debate.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker?
Ms. Corwin?
If I may just remind all the members again that we're talking about ourselves, our own opinions on the bill, not about the motivations of other members.
I was just going to say we've always had this debate in a very respectful back and forth. And I think that this was an unfortunate departure from what has always been a very respectful back and forth. But I also think that people can't make up science. It's interesting that some people deny science on the one hand and then on the other hand make up science. The bill refers to viability. Viability refers to whether or not a fetus can survive outside of the womb. And there is a point at which...
Sir, Mr. DiPietro, why do you rise?
Sure.
Glick will yield.
Ms. Glick, viability, I think I mentioned on scientific terms, viability starts very early, still when an abortion is possible for another for another, I think, 10 weeks or more. So what kind of viability are you talking about?
Well, I don't know what type of viability you're talking about.
Talking about American Medical Association
Mr.
viability.
If he's
DiPietro.
not going to let me answer
Yes,
his
sir.
questions, he can
Ms.
come
Glick,
back
I
for
got-
his second 15.
I'll handle it. Sir, you ask a question, allow an answer. If you don't agree with that answer, that's one thing. You can ask another question.
She
But
asked me where
if
I got
she
my...
is in the middle, sir, if she's in the middle of answering your question, it's disrespectful to cut her off.
I understand that, sir, but
So-
she asked me a question where I
did
got my
not.
information.
No, she
said
did
I
not. She was
didn't know
answering
what
your
he was
question. Please, let's stay in our own lanes, please. Go- Ms. Glick?
I answered, it's the American Medical Association that determines the viability of when a baby is routinely saved in the womb. And you were talking on the viability, so I just wanted to know at what point, since you can have an abortion up to 20-some weeks, why, but the baby can be conceived weeks before, I was just asking that question.
24 weeks.
Right. And a
She
baby can
answered the
routinely
question.
be saved, I have it in here, I think at 12 or 14 weeks or something. So if that's true... if baby
Well, I
can
don't
routinely
believe
be saved-
that's true. I don't believe
You
that's
disre-
true, and I refuse to continue to yield. Wasting my
Okay,
time on
American Medical Association's wrong, I guess.
it.
Proceed, Ms. Glick.
If they are suggesting that a fetus survives at 12 weeks outside of the womb, I doubt that that could be documented. In any event, because New York State took the leadership position prior to Roe v. Wade of eliminating our prohibition on abortion, we have lagged behind in protection for the health of the mother. Nothing in this bill would prevent religious objections on the part of hospitals or individual practitioners. So people's rights are not, their religious rights are not being interfered with. It is when there is a determination that the state should interfere with the individual rights of a woman to make a decision. You're not only, you're violating constitutionally protected right, but you are also interfering in a woman's privacy. Now, we have heard in the past very graphic descriptions of the abortion procedures. I'm not sure if they're accurate or not, but even if they were, there are many medical procedures that one could describe in very graphic detail that would horrify us. We do not ask people if they would wish to see a film of open heart surgery before they go in for a coronary bypass surgery, because they might think twice about it. You have to make a long incision through the sternum. You have to crack the ribs. You have to lift the heart out of the cavity in order to hook it up to a machine where the blood is flowing through a machine and keeping you alive through artificial means for maybe 3, 4, or 5 hours. And then, after what could be, if you were, you suffer pain afterwards as you are recovering from very extensive surgery, weeks of surgery, post-surgical recovery. So we don't do that. We say that we're not going to interfere in people's personal health care decisions. And that's what this is about. And I would suggest to you that it is only because it is women who are in this position where they are the ones who are capable of being pregnant, that they're being second-guessed. Personally, upsetting to see that we still, in this 21st century, are having the same debates that we've had for several decades. This is a very simple bill. It aligns New York State law with federal statute. And that is all this does. It respects religious institutions, practitioners. It does not violate a partial birth abortion ban. It simply says that a woman's health and life needs to be protected under state law.
Ms. Davila.
On the bill.
On
I
the
just
bill,
want-
Ms. Davila.
Thank you. I just want to say, Assemblywoman Glick, you're doing a phenomenal job. Thank you so much for representing us. But I just have to say that a lot of the comments that were made today were completely inappropriate and unacceptable. That's number one. Number two, I am a woman of color, just like so many here. And
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker?
Ms.
I-
Corwin?
Yes, I think it's really important that we try to stick within the rules of the House and we stick to the bill. I believe that's what the rule is, and I think that's where we should be staying.
Thank you, Mrs. Corwin. Proceed, Ms. Davila.
Yes, I just wanted to also explain a little bit about my history as a young woman and a teenage mom, and what Assemblywoman Glick spoke about, young teenage mothers becoming sick or getting toxemia, that now they call it preeclampsia, was a big part of me giving birth to a 4-pound baby girl that now is a beautiful, vibrant young woman. I made that choice, and I'm very happy I did. However, I had to really struggle really, really hard to raise her. And if I was to give an advice to another young woman, coming from a district like mine, I would absolutely say that they should rethink it and that they have a choice. So I just want to reiterate and also agree with Deborah Glick today. There are a lot of reasons why this piece of law is extremely important in districts that are of minority. And if no one sees that, then, and also I just want to bring up one statistic that people didn't speak about. In New York City, in most of our hospitals, we get a large number of young women coming from other states where they cannot have abortions. They come to New York City to get these abortions because they're not able to get them in other states. So think about that when you start talking, because it's not only communities that are of color. We have to look at those statistics in the hospital once again. So thank you again. I commend you, Assemblywoman, and I am in the affirmative.